Meet with you virtually and host these. Oh, okay. Go ahead. Okay. Sorry about that. We'll start over. My name is Liza Leonard. I'm the incoming president of the Idaho Falls Rotary Club. Thank you for joining us for today's program. We are so pleased to be able to continue to meet with you virtually in the studios of IE Productions, who help us host these programs. For those of you joining us that are not Rotarians, I'd like to take just a moment to tell you a little bit about ourselves. The Rotary Club is an international service organization with approximately 1.2 million members worldwide. Our motto is service above self. We are always accepting new members, and we would love to learn more. We would love for you to learn more about our club. So please feel free to follow our Facebook page or reach out to us via our website, ifrotary.org. I'd like to take a moment just to address some club business. I want to thank Gina Stevenson, our vice president, for putting together the virtual cooking class that took place last week with Diablo's Kitchen, and for all the participating Rotarians. It was great to have you gather and interact at this time, and we look forward to the next cooking class. Club elections closed yesterday, and I want just appreciate all Rotarians who took the time to submit a vote and help determine our incoming leadership. And it is with great pleasure that I will announce our new club vice president, Catherine Smith. So Catherine Smith will be coming on board as vice president at our next Rotary year, which begins July 2021. We are so grateful for Catherine for being willing to run for this leadership role and to accept this position. Many of you know Catherine very well as an outstanding Rotarian and as the executive director of the Idaho Falls Downtown Development Corporation. We appreciate Catherine and congratulate her. We also elected 3 board members that are new in those elections that closed yesterday. And our New Horizons chairperson and immediate past president, Michael Blennis, is still contacting those individuals, so we will let you know soon of those election results. I want to take a moment just to thank Michael Blennis for his leadership in this area, as well as Lindsay Romanque, who helped put together the elections, and Carrie Hammond, who helped us to publicize those. We thank you for your service in our election process. It was a very smooth one. It was a new process, but we appreciate your work in making that possible. I also want to mention that at yesterday's club board meeting, we accepted the resignation of our club president, Michelle Holt. We will miss Michelle. Michelle accepted a new position in Tri-Cities, Washington, and will be moving there very soon. Michelle provided wonderful leadership in the role as club president and in this community. We value the time that she spent as our club president since last July, and we will very much miss her. Thank you, Michelle, and congratulations on your new position in the Tri-Cities. This will mean that I will begin my new role as club president earlier than our typical Rotary year start time. And I'm very grateful to Michael Blennis again for being willing to help us through this transition. I now want to turn the time over to our program chairs, Carrie and Jerry Scheid. Carrie and Jerry have put together a wonderful month of programs, and we thank them for doing that. Thank you, Carrie.
Well, thank you very much, Eliza. It gives me great pleasure today to introduce Justin Hayes. Justin is the executive director for the Idaho Conservation League, an Idaho-based statewide conservation organization working to protect the air you breathe, the water you drink, the wildlife, and the wildlands that you love. Idaho Conservation League, ICL, is Idaho's leading voice for conservation. In leading ICL, Justin relies on his unique blend of science-based technical skills, public policy experience, and the love of people and the outdoors. Prior to becoming ICL's executive director, Justin served as director of the ICL's conservation programs for 18 years. He has a Master of Science in Earth Systems, focusing on ecosystem management, a Bachelor of Science in Earth Systems, and a Bachelor of Arts in Human Biology, all from Stanford University. A native Idahoan, Justin rejoices in the knowledge that his work is protecting the things that make Idaho a great place to live: our spectacular landscapes, our wildlife, clean air, and clean water. Justin lives in Boise and enjoys spending his free time hunting and fishing in Idaho's backcountry, mountain biking, skiing, and running Idaho's amazing rivers. Justin?
Thank you very much, Jerry. I'm going to share my screen here, so hopefully that goes smoothly. And can I get a signal from someone that you can see what? Excellent. Thank you very much. Let me start today by just saying thank you very much for this opportunity. We have a number of members in the Idaho Falls area, and it's an important part of the state for our conservation community. And it's really wonderful to be able to spend some time with you. So thank you very much. I'm going to start by talking a little bit about ICL. And for some reason, I'm not able to advance my slides. Give me just a second while I try and figure out why that's not working. There we go. So who is the Idaho Conservation League? Well, as Jerry mentioned, we're a state-based conservation organization. We were formed in 1973. We have about 30,000 supporters all across the state, and we're governed by a volunteer board of directors. For many years, Jerry Scheid was on our board of directors, and I would just like to say how important it was to have his strong voice for conservation and for Eastern Idaho on our board. Other key members from your community have been in our board of directors over the years too. Jerry Brady is a past board member. And right now we're fortunate to have Idaho Falls represented on our board by Justina Gooden-Helton, who's been on our board for a little over a year now and contributing to much of what the organization is doing. In addition to the supporters that we have across the state, we have staff across the state. We have about 24 staff right now and 3 offices. I'm in our Boise office. We have an office in the Wood River Valley and also an office up in Sandpoint. So we try and provide conservation coverage, if you will, for the entire state for all of the members on a whole variety of issues. I'd like to talk a little bit about some of the past successes that ICL has been involved in. Many people are familiar with the work that we've done on public lands. In fact, many people think of ICL as primarily a public lands oriented group. Over the last 15 or 20 years, we've worked extensively on wilderness, protecting our public lands and public access to it. We've been a partner with many in this state to protecting 795,000 acres of wilderness. We've also protected many special rivers as wild and scenic. And we've worked across the state to provide protection for 9.3 million acres of roadless areas. Those are usually backcountry areas found on national forests, but that's an important designation and a protection that all Idahoans get to participate in and enjoy. We've also worked across the state to stop coal-fired power plants from being built in our state. And we've worked successfully to close down coal-fired power plants. And I'll talk a little bit more about that later in my talk. We've worked for many years with citizens and communities and state regulators to ensure that Idaho has stringent air quality standards and also stringent water quality standards. And we've also worked in many local communities to protect open space. And in some instances, we've been involved and successfully passed ballot measures to provide funding to protect local open space for communities to enjoy. And we've also continued to work across the state to protect public access to public lands. So these are just some of the large things that we've worked with many across the state to succeed on. And now I'm going to talk a little bit about how we've been so successful in Idaho. So what kind of stuff do we have in our toolbox? Well, ICL is about people. We are a people-based organization. We're a grassroots organizing group. We're nonpartisan. Idaho is the sort of state where if you don't work across party lines, you won't be very successful. And conservation is not an issue that only appeals to people who identify as Democrats or as Republicans. Conservation is a bipartisan issue, and we work closely with all folks across the state. We also work quite a bit on education and science. We bring a lot of science and technical skills to our work. Our staff has a lot of experience and professional training in the hard sciences. We also bring a lot of process knowledge, if you will. How do you protect these areas and how do you work for stringent water quality standards? You need to know how those processes work. And so we're quite skillful in navigating these processes. We also spend time lobbying these issues in the state legislature and federal Congress. We work to pass laws, and then we work to make sure that laws are implemented. So those are some of the tools that we have in our toolbox. and we use them at different times and in different ways, but we are able to be quite successful by relying on the people of Idaho to come together and support conservation. I'd like to talk about ICL's 4 major campaigns. Our campaigns help us focus our work. As a statewide organization, we work on many, many issues, large and small, but it is really important to have some big planks, some things that really draw our members together and help the organization stay focused. So our 4 large campaigns are cleaning up the Snake River across southern Idaho, restoring Idaho's wild salmon and steelhead, climate change, and we're tackling climate change by working to make Idaho carbon neutral, and also ensuring landscape level protection for our public lands. So I'm going to dig into each of these campaigns here. First, I'm going to talk about restoring and cleaning up the Snake River as it flows across southern Idaho. You know, Idaho Falls is right there on the Snake River. You're probably more intimately connected to the Snake River than any community in the state. And I think it's important for us to recognize, though, how important the Snake River is for so much of Idaho. I think this map does a really nice job of helping people see that much of southern Idaho is connected either directly or indirectly by the Snake River or the Eastern Snake River Plain aquifer. So in this map here, you can see where the river's flowing along. You can see many of the communities and reservoirs along it. And then this other area here, this is the aquifer. And so many people in Idaho rely on the river or the aquifer for water that it's an important resource for us to pay very close attention to. And that's why it's one of our primary campaigns. In Eastern Idaho, you're fortunate to experience the Snake River like this. It's a blue ribbon trout fishery. People from all over the state and across the nation and internationally travel to Eastern Idaho to experience the Snake River in this grandeur. It's really quite an experience to fish on this river. And some of my favorite times fishing in Idaho have been on the Snake. I love the day float. I love the overnights in the canyon. And this is an incredible place, and we're lucky to have it in our state. But this same river, as it flows across the southern arc of our state, becomes a very different river. In Western Idaho, we experience it very differently than you do. In Western Idaho, when the Snake River, gets to Brownlee Reservoir, our western border with Oregon, it's often so contaminated that there are official state warnings about it. So up here, I've got a headline from a local newspaper: health officials warn of harmful algal bloom at Hells Canyon and Brownlee reservoirs. And then I've got some snippets down here from an official health advisory issued by Southwest District Health and the Department of Environmental Quality. It says here, when recreating near or in Brownlee Reservoir, take the following precautions while the advisory is in effect. Avoid swimming, wading, or other activities. Take extra precautions to ensure that children, pets, and livestock are not exposed to the water. And then you're cautioned, clean with potable water as soon as possible if water contacts skin or pet fur. So that very same river, that blue ribbon trout fishery that you experience in Eastern Idaho, is so contaminated that the state urges you to go find some potable water and rinse your skin if you touch that river. That's pretty incredible. So what's happening in Idaho? Why is the river that you experience changing so radically and becoming this river that we experience that, frankly, we're warned not to experience? Well, not that far downstream from you, in the Milner stretch, Milner Dam diverts almost the entire flow of the Snake River. This is the bed of the Snake River. There's a little trickle of water running down a little thing right here. You can hop across the Snake River at Milner Dam. Most of the flow of the Snake River is diverted into irrigation infrastructure. And the water that does return to the Snake River downstream from here is often irrigation return flow, and it brings contaminants from agricultural fields with it. And much of the water also comes back to the river as springs. It's recharged from springs. Maybe you've seen pictures of sort of the Thousand Springs Reach in the Hagerman area. But increasingly, those springs are contaminated as well. So the river is dried up here, and as it is reborn through either recharge or return flows, often those return flows carry pollution with them. And many of you have traveled throughout the Magic Valley and the Twin Falls area, and you're very familiar with the agricultural community down there and how it's changed over the years. There is a significant impact on water quality and the Magic Valley from dairies. This is just one of many dairies. This was from an overflight that we did. I'm just showing it to give you guys a sense and a reminder of the scale of an individual dairy operation. So a lot of dairies equals a lot of manure. And so we do a little manure math. There are about 425,000 cows in the Magic Valley, dairy cows, producing milk and dairy cows. They produce about 120 pounds of waste a day. That equals 51 million pounds of waste per day on aggregate. That's 6 million gallons of waste. What do we do with all that waste? Well, we all are very familiar that manure is an excellent fertilizer, and that's the primary way in which manure is utilized in the Magic Valley. But I want to talk a little bit about how sometimes you got to remember the amount of waste that we're talking about is an overwhelming number. So the cows in the Magic Valley produce as much waste on a daily basis as a city of 12 million people. This is a picture of New York City. You can see the picture of their huge sewage treatment plant there. They actually have 2 sewage treatment plants about this size. New York's only 8.6 million people. So on a daily basis, the Magic Valley dairies are producing as much waste as 12 million people. And that waste isn't really treated. We use it, but it's not really treated. So in this picture here, you see typical ways in which manure is applied to fields as part of traditional agricultural practices. And as I mentioned earlier, manure is an excellent fertilizer, but you've got to make sure you're applying it at rates that make sense for the crops that you're growing in the area that you're working in. And I think that the problem here that we're seeing is it's too concentrated. We have too much waste in too small of an area, and it's starting to show up as a real problem. The Idaho Conservation League puts together a report about groundwater and groundwater contamination in the Magic Valley. This is our cover shot of our 2020 report. In here, we relied on extensive data that's been collected by the state and other federal agencies to demonstrate that groundwater and aquifer water quality that people rely on for drinking is increasingly becoming contaminated with nitrogen and phosphorus and other contaminants. And as I mentioned earlier, these springs, as they flow into the Snake River, means that the river is being recharged with contaminated water as well. So this is a pretty significant issue, and it's one that we're devoting a lot of our time and resources to trying to resolve. So how are we going to fix this? What do we need? Well, what we need is a partnership. We need a partnership that involves state agencies, federal agencies, tribal participation, and private partnership, agricultural community partnership, a watershed-wide cleanup. I've got on this slide here 4 examples of other massive watershed-wide cleanups that are happening across the United States that I believe we need to use as models for our work. Whether it's what's happening in the Great Lakes, in Chesapeake Bay, in the Everglades, or in the Bay Delta area in California. These communities have recognized that the problems are so large that they cannot be fixed by any one individual. And we need to work together, and we really need to bring resources in from beyond the region so that we have the funding to implement the scope and scale of cleanup that's needed. So Idaho Conservation League is working in partnership with many other people, other nonprofits, state and federal agencies, agricultural and industry associations to address this problem. But there's a lot of work to do. So that's one of our primary campaigns. I want to turn now to one of our other campaigns, restoring Idaho's wild salmon and steelhead. I love this map. We had it made because I think sometimes people forget how far our fish have to travel. Salmon and steelhead, as you all know, are born in Idaho. They're born in the high mountains and fresh, clean water of the salmon and clear water drainages. And then those young fish, as juveniles, smolts, 4 to 6 inches long, they swim out of Idaho, pushed by the current. And traditionally, they've swum down the Snake River, to the Columbia River and out to the ocean where they mature, and then they start swimming back upstream as adults. Those little fish that left Idaho, they return as these monsters. And they've also, they bring a lot of nutrients from the ocean back to Idaho when they come. So fish now, though, have to swim out of Idaho past a series of federal dams that have been built on the Snake River. These little icons here represent the 4 lower Snake River dams, and then 4 dams on the Columbia. The juvenile fish typically have to pass these dams either by going over the spillways or being flushed through the turbines or through a complicated bypass system. They have to swim through the reservoirs, though. And this trip, which used to take maybe 2 weeks to leave Idaho and get to the ocean, now takes maybe a month. And along that way, they're swimming through reservoirs as opposed to being pushed through the current. And in those warm reservoirs, increasingly they're encountering large populations of predatory fish that didn't used to be there in those numbers. Some of those fish are native, but some of them are not. We now have walleye that feast on juvenile fish as they migrate out. But they get to the ocean, they grow up, and they return. And thankfully, these dams all have fish ladders, of course, so adults can swim up past the dams. But each dam takes its toll. And in time, we're starting to see that Idaho populations of fish are really declining. This chart here shows you from 1962, when the first dam, Ice Harbor Dam, was put in on the lower Snake. Populations of Idaho fish are declining. Different colors here mean different fish. We've got wild steelhead in this gray, and we've got wild spring summer Chinook in this green. Populations are really quite low. These dashed lines are the goals. These are the goals that we've agreed as a community and as a region that we're trying to achieve. We're a long way from those goals, and our fish continue to decline. And of course, you all know that these fish are protected under the Endangered Species Act. I recently participated in an 18-month effort that was brought together by Governor Little. He created a work group of people from across the state representing different issues. I was there representing fish and conservation. I was joined at that table by other conservation groups, tribes. The Shoshone-Bannock tribe in eastern Idaho was part of it, the Nez Perce tribe in western Idaho. We were also fortunate to be joined in this work group by members from the agricultural community, the water users, Port of Lewiston, grain growers, Idaho Power, other utilities. This is a diverse group. And what we all agreed upon was the status quo isn't working. What we're doing now to try and save fish isn't working. We need to do more. And we all affirmed these goals that we're trying to shoot for. So we all know what we're trying to accomplish. We don't all agree how to get there yet, but we all know what we're trying to achieve. And we all think that more needs to be done. I'd like to talk a little bit about many of the things that we talked about as a group, though, and many of the things that my organization and others are focused on. So I'm an environmental group. Of course, I'm here for fish. I want abundant wild fish, fish that are in such abundance that they're ecologically meaningful again, and they're economically meaningful again. These fish form the backbone of the ecosystems of the salmon and Clearwater Basin. I mentioned earlier that they swim out as little juveniles and they come back as big adults. When they come back as big adults, many of those fish die when spawning. That's part of their natural life cycle. But the nutrients that they brought from the ocean are left in central Idaho as their carcasses decompose and feed the environment. They feed other fish, they feed birds, they feed wildlife. And a healthy ecosystem depends on a certain amount of nutrients in them, and these fish are a key part of that. But we also talked about and want to make sure that as we think about how do we save fish, we are protecting a thriving agricultural community and the economies that go along with it. On the lower Snake River, those dams currently provide barge traffic, primarily for grain, some of it coming out of Idaho, much of it coming out of eastern Washington. And as we talk about how do we save fish, we need to make sure that we're not losing sight of the fact that agricultural communities rely on those dams, and we need to talk about how to take care of their needs too. Also, we need to be talking about how to ensure that we continue to have affordable, reliable, clean electricity. The four lower Snake River dams produce electricity. And if we were to remove them, what would we do about that? It's not simply it's not, you can't just take them out and not have an impact. You have to plan for it, you have to build for it, and you need to replace the energy somewhere. And we also all recognize that we want to fulfill our moral and legal obligations to each other. These salmon and steelhead form the cultural basis for many of the Native American tribes in Idaho, and also for many of the communities along these rivers that rely on them for sport fishing and other economic reasons. We have a moral and legal obligation to restore salmon and steelhead. Promises were made, and we need to keep them. And we also all want to have healthy and prosperous communities, whether it's a community that's near a river or a community that's far away from a river. Idaho is strengthened and the Northwest is strengthened when we have prosperous communities for the people who are living here now and for our children. We want homes and communities that our children want to return to. And I'll just say that right now, I'm not sure that we have any of these things along the corridors of the Salmon and Clearwater River in much Idaho. We don't have abundant fish. We don't necessarily have thriving agricultural communities. They're under a lot of pressure and strain right now. And we don't necessarily have guaranteed access to reliable and affordable electricity. Rates have been increasing across the region for a number of years. And the Bonneville Power Administration, which markets the electricity from these dams, is actually kind of in financial trouble. And one of the reasons that they're in trouble is that their infrastructure, these dams and the other dams in the system, are aging and require a lot of investment for upkeep, maintenance, and improvement. And also, renewable energies are coming online in a way that is often cost competitive and sometimes cheaper than the existing hydro system can provide. So there's a lot of new competition in the energy markets in the West. Things are changing rapidly, and we need to see this, and we need to plan for it. So it's clear to me and to others that look at this that major system changes are needed if we're going to make all of the communities that are connected to salmon and our rivers whole. And there's some really intentional language here on this slide that I want to point out to you. I'm saying here we want to make all communities whole. Sometimes you hear people say about keeping communities whole. And while we talk about changes that are coming, we do want to keep the communities whole that feel like they might be impacted by these changes. But there are a number of communities in Idaho that are not whole now, and they need to be made whole. That gets back to the moral and legal obligations that we have to each other as a society. So as we work together to restore fish, let's also work together to keep communities and make communities whole. And at the Idaho Conservation League, we agree that removing the 4 federal dams on the lower Snake River in Washington state is the single most important thing that we can do to save salmon and steelhead. It's the single most important thing. There's not a way to save these fish without removing the dams. However, removing the dams is actually not a silver bullet. There's a lot of things that are affecting the decline of these fish. It's not just the dams. And if we're going to restore these fish, we need to actually take a pretty broad approach. So salmon investments, what do we need to be doing to help restore fish? A lot of important habitat work needs to be done. We need to be monitoring harvest, and we need to be regulating harvest to ensure that we're not harming wild fish. The hatchery systems that are in place, they need to be operated in a way that doesn't harm wild stocks, but does continue to provide for harvest opportunities from hatchery fish. I've got hydro system written here. That's just a fancy word for dams. You know, when we talk about removing a couple of dams in the system, most of the dams are going to stay. And we need to make sure that we make the improvements and operate them in a way that supports our salmon and steelhead populations. And I mentioned that in those reservoirs, we now see a lot of predator fish eating juveniles. It's not just fish, of course. We see predator birds eating smolts. Down further on the Columbia and the Astoria area, we see sea lions in areas where they didn't used to be, or eating fish in ways that fish didn't used to get bottlenecked up at fish ladders. And now you have sea lions, say, camped out at fish ladders, basically eating adult fish as they swim by in numbers that are not representative of the way it used to be. And then, of course, there are ocean conditions that need to be addressed. And that's kind of a climate change issue. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. There's a lot of investments, though, that need to happen in salmon. There's no silver bullet. But at the Idaho Conservation League, we're following the scientific community's advice that dam removal has to be part of that mix. And then, of course, there's the community investment. If we're going to make all communities whole, we need to make sure that as we think about fish and what we're doing for fish, we're spending as much time thinking about the communities and what we're going to be doing for people in these communities. Transportation, I mentioned barge traffic. Removal of the dams means we have to transition away from barges to rail. Energy production, we want to see renewable energy that's cost effective and reliable. Transmission systems to move that energy from around the region. Irrigation infrastructure that would be affected by dam removal needs to be attended to. Community infrastructure and job creation. So it's not just about fish, it's about communities. I'm going to pivot now and talk about our third major campaign. This is climate change and making Idaho carbon neutral. You don't know it, but right here at the top of the screen, this is our secret plan. We're going to clean the grid and electrify everything. We need to move away from fossil fuels, whether that's motor vehicle fuels or fuels to generate electricity. We need to clean that up, and we need to electrify everything. We need electric vehicles, and you'll see some of the other slides here where I'll talk about that more. But the secret plan for the Idaho Conservation League is to clean up the grid and electrify everything. And we do that in a bunch of different ways in different venues. The text on the bottom of this slide talks about our work directly with Idaho utilities and energy users. We work a lot in the Public Utilities Commission, and there we work to expand energy conservation measures at utility scale and move us away from fossil fuels and move us towards renewable energy. First things first, though, the energy efficiency is the best thing we can be doing. The cleanest energy is the energy that's never produced. So at ICL, we have for many years had a program to work with utilities through the Public Utilities Commission to fund and implement large energy conservation programs for consumers. You know, up here on the top of the screen, you're all familiar with the different light bulbs, the small changes we can make in our personal lives that save a tremendous amount of electricity. And when we save electricity, we save money for us. And energy efficiency also, of course, insulation in our homes, both in the winter and in the summer. These are important things. And energy efficient appliances. This saves a lot of money, reduces electricity consumption. And that means we're making less electricity. So that's the cleanest electricity we can get our hands on. And for the electricity that we do need to generate, we want to move away from fossil fuels. We want to get all of the coal-fired power plants that bring power into Idaho retired. We're very fortunate in Idaho, actually, that we don't have any coal-fired power plants within our state boundaries. However, the utilities that serve our state do have partnerships and part shares of ownership in coal-fired power plants outside of our state. So we're working to close those coal-fired power plants down. And we've been incredibly successful. I think it's the case now that every utility that's selling into Idaho, Idaho Power, Rocky Mountain, and Avista, and then Bonneville Power Administration as well, will have all of the coal off their grids by 2035. That's an amazing accomplishment, and we're very proud of that. In fact, we see that utilities want to get away from coal because they recognize it is actually quite expensive. Maintaining this aged coal fleet and dealing with the implications of carbon is an expensive proposition. Moving to renewables is cheaper. And that's why utilities that serve Idaho are moving away from coal. As we move away from coal, we need to replace that energy with renewable fossil fuel-free sources. Solar and wind in Idaho are really fantastic opportunities for us. We also have a strong hydro backbone already in place here in Idaho. Private utilities like Idaho Power, and also, of course, the utility that serves Idaho Falls has hydro in their system, and that's significant and very important. We want to foster that and take best use of it. But as we take opportunities to move away from out-of-state coal plants and build in-state renewables, solar, wind, geothermal, That's an incredible opportunity to bring jobs to Idaho and investment to Idaho. If your utility buys coal energy from out of state, your dollars are going out of state. If your utility buys wind and solar generated in Idaho, your dollars are staying in Idaho and you're supporting local jobs. And that's a really important part of solving this puzzle, creating good paying jobs to support these communities as we transition to cost effective and often much cheaper renewable energy. A key part of our proposal also is to electrify transportation. And you can see part of that is just sort of normalizing electric vehicles. Many people have electric vehicles now, many people have hybrid vehicles now, but some people don't think it's a very good choice for them yet. You can see here in this picture, I'm standing next to Governor Brad Little. This was a couple of years ago, pre-COVID. We're not masked up, of course. And the governor has been enthusiastic about working with folks all across the state to increase investment in electricity generation in Idaho through renewable, and also looking at electric vehicles. So here we've got Idaho Power's hybrid plug-in truck. So it's not all about Teslas, it's about vehicles that can be used by an Idaho workforce, and trucks are a key part of that. But you can also see in this map here, these green dots represent where chargers are in our state. And if you have an electric vehicle and you need to get from one end of our state to the other, frankly, there are not enough chargers yet to make that electric vehicle a very rational choice for you for a lot of your long distance driving. And Idaho is a pretty big, pretty rural state. So we have a lot of work to do before electric vehicles are a real rational choice for many Idahoans for their driving patterns. But if you have a smaller driving network that you're in, if you're just driving a couple miles to and from work, an electric vehicle is an incredibly good choice right now. But part of our job is to get more chargers in our state so it's a better choice for everyone. And then, of course, there's so many other important things that we can do in our communities when we think about transportation. Riding a bike and walking, it's a great way to get around. It's healthy, but it also means that we have to think carefully about how we plan our communities. We need to have our homes near where we work. And so there's work to be done there. We also need to have opportunities for mass transit. And in some communities, it makes sense to think about buses. And in other communities, it makes sense to think about light rail and other more significant ways of moving more people around. So these sorts of transitions to electric vehicles and getting single occupancy vehicles off the road, getting carpooling and people in mass transit, this is really important stuff for people's pocketbook. And it's also really important stuff to address climate change. And then lastly, a key component in our climate work is agriculture. Agriculture is an incredible place for us to kind of get to address climate change in two ways. One is through sequestration. All that carbon in the air that's pulled out of the air by crops, it can be sequestered in healthy long-term crops so we can get there through best management practices, whether it's row crops and no-till, or whether it's forestry as a way of having carbon sequestration. We need to find incentives and best management practices to move in that direction. And you can see in this other picture down here on the bottom right of the slide, this is a picture of a methane digester. The dairy industry is the source of a significant amount of methane to the atmosphere. And methane is a potent greenhouse gas. Having it escape to the atmosphere is bad, but collecting it and then using it as a source of energy can be another way of having a profit center in a dairy. So we're seeing quite a bit of interest in increasing the number of methane digesters in Idaho. We already have many, and more are being planned. And when we see methane digesters come online and electricity generated from them, that's an incredible opportunity because unlike wind or solar, which are a little intermittent, you only have solar when the sun is shining and wind when the wind is blowing. Methane digesters are kind of like firm power. They're producing all the time. So this can be a key part of renewable energy addressing climate change, providing additional income stream for dairies. And it's a way of addressing renewable energy in a way that sort of helps balance the portfolio. Also, I'll just say that a lot of this work on ag with regard to climate has a tight interconnect with our work to clean up the Snake River. So there's a good synergy here. I'm going to now turn to our fourth major campaign, which is our public lands work. So ensuring landscape level protection on public lands. We work across the state. Much of Idaho is public, either Bureau of Land Management, National Forest. So many people in Idaho enjoy our public lands. It's really hard to overstate the importance of it for how we feel about the state, what we do in the state. It's really part of our Idaho identity. Former Governor Cecil Andrus used to say that our public lands were like a second paycheck for all Idahoans. When we get out on these public lands, we hunt, we fish, we hike, we bird watch, we spend time with family and friends. It recharges our souls. And the work of the Idaho Conservation League is well received by Idahoans across the state when we talk about how important public lands are. Many of you are probably familiar with the sawtooths and the Boulder white clouds. And I want to talk about some of the smaller projects that we're involved in Eastern Idaho, though. It's not all about protecting things as wilderness. It's not all about, big federal efforts, working through Congress, designating lands, that kind of stuff. Sometimes a lot of our work focuses in communities, in working with partnership to protect and restore things. My family's from the Pocatello area. I was born in Pocatello and moved away. And my dad's from Soda Springs. So I really enjoy my opportunities to get back to Eastern Idaho. I work quite a bit in the Blackfoot area, Blackfoot River area, Soda Springs. Some of you may be familiar with that. You may not be familiar, though, with a long-standing partnership that the Idaho Conservation League has with Trout Unlimited and the phosphate companies that work in that area. So Monsanto, which was purchased by Bayer, and Simplot, and the other phosphate companies out there, we've been working together for years to restore the health of the Blackfoot River. This is a picture on the banks of the Blackfoot. The folks in this photograph are members of the community and agency folks that we had on a tour out there. We go out there every year and we look at the work we've accomplished together and we plan for the future. I want to talk a little bit about just some of the projects that we're doing out there because I think they're pretty cool. Just to get people focused, though, on where the Blackfoot River is, just in case you haven't been out there, this locator box here is this larger print here. This is the Upper Blackfoot River Basin, Blackfoot Reservoir, Blackfoot River. There are a number of phosphate mines in this area, and there are a number of agricultural practice areas, farms, ranches, timber sales, lots of recreation, vehicle use happens out here. Well-loved, well-used area. Unfortunately, though, some of the creeks out there are not in very good shape. This is a before and after shot of a stretch on Sheep Creek. And in this upper thing, in the before shot here, you can see that it's pretty wide in certain areas, kind of beat out. You can see that there's not good vegetative cover here. And you can see in comparison to this lower slide, the after photo, after restoration took place, that there's many long straight stretches. And here that same stretch is curvy. And we, with our partners, went back into this river. We replanted willows. We added some of these curves back, the original meanders of this river. And we worked to restore the health of this stretch. We're working on water quality issues. These really wide stretches with no willows growing next to it, they heat up in the summertime. The sun makes that water warmer. Warm water is not as good for fish. In this particular area, cattle had been able to get right down on the creek, and they'd eaten all the willows, and they'd sort of trampled down the banks. So there was a lot of mud and sediment getting into the creek, and the water quality was low as a result of that. But we've worked together to actually rewild this creek. It looks like it should again. That's because of the work of the Idaho Conservation League and Trout Unlimited and our partners in the phosphate industry. Here's another example, Chippy Creek, work that we're doing out there. Each one of these little red dots along here is what we call an elevated riffle. We're trying to raise this creek back up into its original creek. Right now it's kind of incised, which means it's kind of cut down into the ground. So the creek's in the bottom of the creek bed, and it no longer really has access to its floodplain. So each of these elevated riffles sort of creates a little pond almost, if you will. And that allows water to get back into its floodplain. That means that it can be a source of water longer into the year for the plants that live next to the creek. And that's really good news for people who run cattle in this area. You need water to have good grass, to have healthy cattle. So we're changing the way that this creek bottom is by putting back in elevated riffles. And in some areas, we're stabilizing banks that have been caving in and falling into the creek. And in other areas, we're returning the creek to its original boundaries, its original meanders. Someone a long time ago took the creek and cut this out and put in an undersized culvert under this road here. We replaced the culvert because that culvert was keeping fish from being able to swim upstream. They'd hit that culvert and couldn't swim upstream anymore. And we're putting the creek back into its original bed over here. And that allows the creek to dissipate some of its energy in this big long corner, as opposed to just rush right into the road where it was starting to start eroding into the road. And this sort of work has been incredibly successful. And we've now reconnected over 25 miles of creeks in the Blackfoot drainage up here. We've cooled water temperatures. We've increased fish populations. And I should say also that the fishery of particular interest here is Yellowstone cutthroat trouts. And so we're seeing a really good response from fish. They're coming back into these areas. They're using these areas again. They're spawning in areas where they haven't been able to get into in a long time. And this is because of the commitment that this community and these companies and nonprofits like mine have to this area. It's been really exciting to be a part of over the last decade. Another issue that we're working on in Eastern Idaho that I want to flag for you is the Kilgore gold mine. Otis Gold is proposing a gold mine, the Kilgore project, north of Idaho Falls some way. You can see that it's real close to Yellowstone. And this area, the Centennials, is a very important migratory area for wildlife. And sorry, my slide wasn't clicking there. Many of you are probably familiar with the Centennials, the fantastic opportunities for recreation, the important grazing opportunities for ranchers, both on private and public. There's water quality issues at stake up here. There's wildlife issues and access at stake up here. And what we're concerned about is that if a gold mine is developed, it'll look a little bit like this, and it'll mean that area is changed forever to the detriment of our public lands, to the detriment of wildlife that need to pass through that area as they move from the Yellowstone ecosystem into central Idaho. And we're very concerned about water quality implications as well. So that's a kind of a whirlwind tour of some of the public lands work that we're doing and within the larger context of our 4 campaigns. But I do want to say that it's really more than just 4 campaigns for us. At ICL, we're working for a just, sustainable, and prosperous Idaho. What does that mean? A just, sustainable, and prosperous Idaho. We want an Idaho that's a great place to live now and in the future. But we also want an Idaho that's a sustainable place to live. The environment sustains us. Water for so many parts of Idaho, whether it's our drinking water or for use in agriculture or for our fish. We need sustainable use. We need sustainable use of other natural resources as well. And we need to address climate change to protect these things. And we want it to be a prosperous state. You know, as we make these changes and work together, in order to have them be really durable, we need to make sure that Idaho is a place where people can have a comfortable life. And that means they need to have good jobs, good paying jobs. We need to have jobs for ourselves and for our children and for future generations of people that will either come to Idaho or be part of Idaho. So Idaho Conservation League is working for a just, sustainable, and prosperous Idaho for all of us. And as I wrap up the formal part of my presentation and invite questions, I'd like to say, I hope you'll get involved with us. We cannot do this work alone. We have 30,000 supporters across the state, and I invite you to be part of our conservation community. I invite you to become a member. If you're interested in becoming a member, visit our website down here, www.idahoconservation.org. There's a button there. You can click to donate and join. You're also invited to become a part of our community and maybe not yet become a member. Learn more about us. So you can do that by texting for Idaho to 52886. If you do that, you'll be entered into our database, if you will, and you'll get emails and other opportunities to be made aware of what ICL is doing, both statewide and in your community. But I invite you to become involved in protecting Idaho's environment, whether it's through the work of the Idaho Conservation League or many of our partner organizations. There's a lot of work to be done, and we all need to be part of it. So with that, I'll end the formal part of my presentation, and I'll ask if there are any questions.
Okay, hold on. Okay.
Well, thank you so very much for that very, very informative and worthwhile presentation, Justin. You've covered a lot of material there, and it's all very well worth hearing. We appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair.
We do have just time for one or two questions, if someone would like to ask.
That would be from you.
What?
I think we're almost out of time, but I think that one question we have for you is, what do you think is your biggest challenge this coming year? Those are really exciting projects. And I'm sorry, this will be it because we're out of time, but what a great presentation.
Thank you. I think that the biggest challenge facing Idaho and Idaho Conservation League in our campaigns right now is urgency. This is a divisive time in American politics and in Idaho as well. And yet we have real urgency, whether it's salmon and steelhead, climate change, cleaning up the Snake River. We need to figure out how to work together to accomplish things together, to make our communities whole, to address the environmental concerns. And right now, it's a difficult time in our country to put partisanship and divisiveness aside and listen carefully to what each other really needs and be there to support each other as we walk down the path of conservation in Idaho. So urgency in a difficult time and the need to be listening and working together.
Okay. Thank you so very much, Justin. We are out of time. We appreciate your presentation, and I'll turn it over to Liza.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for joining us, Mr. Hayes. We appreciate your presentation today. It's a wonderful reminder of what collaboration and communication can do to bring us together in this state. Thank you also to Jerry and Carrie for arranging today's program and a wonderful month with us. We're looking forward to next week's Zoom call with the club. We will send out the invitation for February 3rd at noon, where we will be gathering as a club virtually on Zoom. And we'll also announce next week the remaining programs for March from Program Chair Brad Kramer. Thank you again for joining us today.